Middle childhood is also known as the school years. And as you will see in a bit, it basically takes time during the ages of 6 and up. And this is where we are presented with different tasks, different responsibilities. So our cognition, as well as our physical development and social skills, should be adequate to be able to perform well. As you've seen, there's been a pattern of growth decrease from the time we were infants, and including the time we were prenatally in our mother's womb. And from 6 to 11 years of age, our growth decreases significantly. We find that the average North American child at the age of 6 is 45 pounds and 3.5 feet tall. And we also find that there's a gender difference as girls tend to have slightly more fat than boys do. And this is something that is brought about by the already development of muscle at this age. This is due to hormonal differences, and you will see throughout future slides that this does not change for the most part on average. Now, there are exceptions. Not all girls have more fat than boys, but on average, we do see that distribution. It is also important to note that at the age of 8, girls seem to accumulate fat faster than boys do. And this is because at this age, girls are beginning, on average, to prepare for their menstrual cycles. It takes about 3 years before the girls get their first period that the process and the body begins to adjust and accommodate for that. So you'll see that the presence of estrogen and progesterone contribute to this increase of fat during this age. Boys and girls are very, very flexible when they are at this age. And the reason why they're able to maybe do the splits and bring their legs over their head and do a lot of different things is because their ligaments have not firmly attached to their bones yet. This is something that, in addition to their likelihood and energy, they're likely to jump and do other activities that we as adults don't do, or we may look silly doing in the street. It's not unusual to see a child at Target maybe doing cartwheels, whereas an adult doesn't do that. It is important to note that we may retain some of that flexibility or all of that into adulthood if we engage in regular exercise and specifically stretching. Another thing that children go through at this age is something that is known as the growing pains. And this is typically experienced in the legs, and this is due to the muscles adapting to the enlarging skeleton and the structure of the bones. It is not unusual. I personally remember suffering from pain in my legs when I was younger, and again, it's not an unusual component. In fact, it's been argued that those growth spurts that you may remember seen in earlier stages of our development were also possibly in part composed of pain. And that's why 24 hours before that growth spurt, parents often reported that the child was very uncomfortable and fussy and crying a lot more than usual. The primary teeth are typically lost by between the ages of 6 and 12. And we see also that for some reason girls seem to lose them slightly earlier than boys. This is not unusual, as girls tend to mature faster than boys do. So we think that it has something to do with that pattern. And we also have noted that the lower teeth seem to be lost first and then followed by the upper front. Please note that there are also genetic reasons that may contribute to this. If there are people who smoke in the house, this weakens the immune system, and also this may bring about difficulties in dental health. So that also includes the loss of teeth and tooth decay and gum disease. The brain continues its journey, and by 6 years old, we find that the brain is about 90% of what the adult weight is. This is almost there, but 10% is a significant amount. And we cannot, of course, attribute the maturity cognitive and personal of a child to the size of the brain alone. There are various other reasons that contribute to it, such as culture and experience. But we do find that the brain itself and the weight has a lot to do with it. Growth seems to occur in certain brain structures, and it's important for us to know the white matter and the gray matter. These two components of the brain are important for us to understand, as they give us some insight as to how our behavior may be changing. With white matter, we know that it consists of myelination, and myelination, if you remember, is that fatty and protein coating that wraps around the axon in the neuron. And this, as you also remember, is responsible for increasing the speed of an impulse. Well, what we find at this age and during this developmental period is that there is an increase that is seen of white matter at the prefrontal cortex, parietal lobes, and corpus callosum. You could see in here that the prefrontal cortex, we make decisions, we control our impulses, we focus on our thinking. The parietal lobes are responsible for spatial abilities, which are seen and tested and challenged in school activities and school tasks. And the corpus callosum basically is that tissue that unites the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere. This, in good functioning, would allow us to communicate and perform our activities more smoothly. So the presence of white matter during this age seems to be consistent with the curriculum and whatever we are taught. Additionally, gray matter, which consists mostly of neurons and supportive material, we're talking about the dendrites, we're talking about the soma of the cell. So anywhere where there is no myelination, we would see that there's gray matter within the neuron. And we see that there's also a peak in middle childhood. There's a decline that occurs with synaptic pruning, and this, which may seem detrimental, in fact is not, because with the pruning of the synapses that are not being utilized, it increases our ability to process the information. So now we may be listening to a teacher and we're processing the information in a deeper fashion rather than shallow. Our ability to pay attention for extended periods of time is also increasing thanks to the increase in pruning of these synaptic connections. Inhibition of thoughts and of things that we want to do. When someone suffers from ADHD, they get the thought of ice cream and they may act it out or say it out loud. When we have a synaptic pruning component, we may be able to inhibit those thoughts and maybe put them off until later. And as well as working memory capacity, which contributes to consolidation of the information we're exposed to regularly. As you may remember, the chemicals that are in between the neurons, which are known as synapses, are called neurotransmitters. And these allow us to experience emotions, they allow us to engage in behaviors, and we find that there's a unique balance that typically we are born with. Having too much or too little of one of these or multiple of these can be troublesome, as there could be hallucinations and inadequate behavior. The secretion of certain neurotransmitters is related to cognitive performance, social and emotional adjustment, and our ability to withstand stress. For example, dopamine, we would find that is one that brings about pleasure. In fact, it's one that's secreted at greater amounts whenever there is a consumption of certain chemicals, certain drugs. But the reason why the drug becomes addictive is because the dopamine feels good. Now, a secretion of that at lower levels could bring about a stressful and uncomfortable state of mind. And as a result of that, our ability to develop cognitively, to control our emotions, and to withstand stress can be in part contributed to maybe a reduction of secretion of dopamine itself. That's just an example. We also have serotonin, which, as you may remember, it's associated with mood and with pain. and appetite and sleeping patterns. So if there's a decrease or a significantly lower amount of serotonin, it's possible that we would not be sleeping well. It's possible that we would not be eating well. And those two factors alone combined can bring about not so pleasant mood. We find that, again, the lack or inappropriate balances can be related to developmental problems, inattention and overactivity, emotional disturbance, and even epilepsy. Nutrition continues to be of utmost importance at this age, and we find that in order for children to perform well academically and physically, they need to have a well-balanced diet, having access to all the protein and nutrients and minerals that our body needs. We find that the availability of food is what seems to give way to our preference of food. If a child who does not know how to make an egg has access to cookies, then if that's readily available, they will easily and conveniently pick cookies over an egg or something that may require preparation. So we find that the caregiving process is essential for children. In fact, when we look at overweight children, it is, for the most part, the responsibility of parents. In fact, there have been controversial cases in which parents have lost, or have not lost custody, but they have lost physical custody, at least temporarily, because of because their child or their children were significantly overweight. And while that is something that is a touchy subject and definitely debatable, we find that for the most part, a child's weight and health is at the hands of their caregiver, of the parent. We also find that the familiarity with food has a lot to do with food preferences. Children, for the most part, will prefer the foods that they've been exposed to, and they may be reluctant to try maybe something new. And this is seen, again, throughout past this middle childhood age. You may already be aware of this in here, but we do have an epidemic of overweight and obesity. And these two are different things. Obesity is with a BMI, a body mass index of greater than 30. Overweight is between 25 and 30. And sadly, we find that 32% of children in the United States and adolescents are overweight, whereas 17% are obese. This is a byproduct of unhealthy eating, as well as a lack of physical activities, especially now with access to iPads and electronic devices. Children may be great at playing soccer and video games, but may have no skill whatsoever at playing the sport itself. So balancing those activities with adequate nutrition is essential here. We find that in addition to the lifelong health problems that children may have, there are also serious emotional and social difficulties. Children, as you may remember from childhood, can be quite painfully honest, and they may call us names if we are overweight. And this can impact the self-esteem of the child significantly, whereas it may not only last then, but it may be a lifelong problem. Their social attitudes may be different towards certain groups of people, and that bitterness and hatred in some cases has resulted in sometimes then making not good decisions later in life. So nutrition is not just about health problems and about aesthetics, but it's also about having a balanced state of mind for the child. There are a series of things that can lead to being overweight, but we've found that the most common causes of obesity are that parents may be overweight, lack of knowledge about healthy diet, and that it's not unusual here. In fact, there's been talks about simplifying the nutrition facts table in the back of every food or item. You've also seen an increase of calories being posted on restaurants, so now you know what you are consuming. The low-cost foods that we have access to, especially in lower socioeconomic status places. If you drive up to different parts of the wealthier communities in our city and across the nation, you would find very difficult to find fast food places. whereas in lower socioeconomic communities, we do find the low-cost foods, and they tend to be not the healthiest. So there's a lot of controversy on that as well. The argument is that there may be a targeting by some of these corporations of lower socioeconomic status, and mixing that with lack of knowledge and even dependency on that is problematic. Babies are born underweight, and they're also at elevated risk for later overweight and obesity, and that has a lot to do with lower metabolism rate. And also, if they don't eat regularly, it contributes to that. And also, children who get less nightly sleep were more likely to be overweight 5 years later, per a study in 2007. So this is consistent with us even in adulthood, as you find that if you were to, for example, go out or be up at night, 2 or 3 a.m., well, if you're not sleeping, you may get hungry. And that's where King Taco or whatever other late night spot may come in handy. And of course, you don't find the healthy options available at 2 or 3 a.m. Typically, it's fast food. And the restaurants know this, as there are a series of commercials out there targeting late night cravings with munchies boxes and various things. Treating obesity is very difficult because it's often perceived to be a personal issue, an individual issue, but it's not. It's now been recognized that obesity is a family disorder. Once again, even if the child is the only one that's overweight or obese, it's still a family disorder because he is having access to the food that is brought home. We find that fewer than 20% of children get treatment for obesity. And oftentimes, parents may not be concerned about that as they find it cute. However, when children reach adolescence and they begin to maybe have interest in dating, they often take matters into their own hands, and the results and their attempts on trying to combat this overweight can result in dangerous disorders such as anorexia and bulimia. And this is because there's a sense of despair to fix something in 1 year or in 2 months, something that has been ongoing for 12, 13 years. So we find that taking a family approach to obesity and being overweight is the best approach, and that's what seems to have the highest success rate. The suggestion is that also parents not focus much on the body shape, but that they focus on health components. Telling a young girl or a young man that they need to exercise so they could lose their stomach or the belly or the fat is offensive, and it could be hurtful. Instead, what experts recommend is that we should encourage them to exercise for health reasons. And for the most part, if we pick up good habits and balance our nutrition, the aesthetic reasons, the aesthetic factors may fall into place. Some things that are recommended for families are that they exercise together, that they maybe pick different eating patterns, praise each other as reinforcement, and hold each other accountable. If the child is now an adolescent or maybe even a young adult, what I typically recommend to my clients who wanted to lose weight and wanted some tips was that they communicate with a close friend that they are trying to lose weight. And before they have a meal, they should take a picture of the meal and send it over to their friend and expect feedback from them, such as, all right, yeah, go ahead and eat that cake, or maybe you should think about it. You already had one. So just putting something visual and putting it out there may make you think twice about eating that cheesecake or that double fried Oreo. At this age, we continue seeing children's cognition develop, and some of the ways we explore this is through their interaction with peers. They often engage in playing games with peers, but it's not always with kids. They may engage in games by themselves, using boxes, using brooms, and personifying different items around the house. These games with rules become a lot more common during middle childhood, as there seems to be a sense of morale and sharing and responsibility and consequences in them. These typically contribute to an emotional and social development with kids. as they learn that they need to adhere to the rules and play by the rules. It's not unusual to see that a kid would maybe play tag with others and then state where base is, but when they're caught, they may say, well, this is base as well, so I'm safe. Making it seem as though because they invented the game, they could change the rules as they please. And it is important for parents to guide them so that they could learn about responsibility and respect toward others. Games that are invented by children typically enhance the imagination, as they can get really creative with that, and they also sharpen their physical skills, as they may have to engage in twisting and hopping and jumping and turning and sprinting. So this is always a good time to maybe also exercise their bodies a little bit. Then we also find that these games allow a child to try different roles, different styles of cooperating, and learning to also accept losing. Losing is an important component of living. We all want to win the entire time, but we know that life is a mix of both, and teaching children that it's not the end of the world if we were to lose a game goes a long way later in life. We also see that children are often placed either because they ask where parents wanted them to be part of organized youth sports. And so you have the Pee Wee and you have the Pee Wee leagues and various other little leagues where children can learn about teams, they can learn about unity, they could also learn about rules. And we find that these are often associated with increased self-esteem and social skills because they are now a part of a team. They have they contribute to a victory in a game. They may be praised for their performance one day, or they may also learn that maybe they shouldn't be putting people down because they also could lose, and there's injuries and different aspects that could be learned from being part of organized youth sports. This, for the most part, is a healthy activity, but when coaches and parents get too emotional and they criticize rather than encourage, this can turn into something bad. This can make a child feel anxious, and we find that typically high parental pressure can result in emotional difficulties by the child. Oftentimes the child who is criticized harshly could start feeling incompetent, and they often develop a sense of bitterness and resentment toward their parents for high pressure of that. Parents sometimes want their children to succeed because they view their child as the last opportunity maybe for their dreams. So if I have kids and I wanted to be a professional basketball player, then I may put all the pressure on my child, hoping that he would make it. And this is an unnecessary pressure, as youth sports are supposed to be for self-esteem and social skills, not to necessarily get to the NBA or NFL. If it happens, then it does, but it shouldn't be that way, as it does affect us emotionally.